We want to welcome everybody to Parent, and I've been so excited for my guest, Kamini Lakani, and you're just one of my favorite people in the world.
Thank you so much, Kat.
And so anytime I get to talk to you, uh, I'm just delighted, and I'm delighted to share you with everybody else. I really want everyone who's able to join us to know more about you. So why don't you tell us about your journey and what brought you to RDI, because I think it lays a foundation for what we're going to talk about.
Right. Thank you so much, Kat. The feeling is absolutely mutual to be here with you today. My journey began 32 years ago. Almost, my son is going to turn 32 in the next 10 days. And when Mohit was diagnosed with autism, this was way back in 1992, I had no clue what it was. And I was living in South Korea at that time. And uh, they didn't have English speaking therapists in Seoul. So, but luckily there was an American army base right there. And from there, they would send me like one speech language pathologist who would come in once a week and a special educator who would come in a couple times a week. And, I had this burning desire in my heart, this feeling that I'm not doing enough. And that got to me, and so I started traveling to the US every year. And of course, in those days it was all about ABA. So my first visit was at the Lovas Clinic at UCLA, and that's where I was trained in discrete trial. So these were the days before your YouTube and all of that. So I would go back home, I would learn there, practice in front of them, go back home, work with Mohit, put in 4 hours a day. And then we had those big black VHS tapes, which I would record on and send to them. And then they would give me feedback. So that's how my ABA work began, actually, way back so many years ago. And soon I realized as Mohit grew, while his language was getting a little better, but I could see a lot of other things coming in, like aggression and so many behavior issues. We went back to India and I started a center there. By this time, I was a BCABA and I had gotten into verbal behavior, but things weren't really working. And not only for my own son, but even for the other students that I worked with. So what I saw initially was a spurt in language, and then, but it wasn't generalizing. And parents would say, but the data sheets show all these words, but my son or my daughter doesn't use these. And at the same time, there were all these behavior issues, aggression in particular, that I saw with my older students. And that led me to, I was always looking for something else, something to work on. And then a friend talked to me about RDI. And I remember going to Kuala Lumpur to attend a workshop which was conducted by Macy. And that's how I was introduced to RDI. And within 3 months, I was in Houston attending workshops with Dr. Gutstein. And I started working with Joyce Albu, which was such a turning point in my life. And that's how my RDI journey began. So it was long, and it changed my life. It Mohit changed as a person. I changed. I let go of all the stress that I was carrying. And he became this, from this person who was absolutely shut down, like his head would be down like this all the time, to this young man. He was 17 at that time. I found RDI when he was 17. So my ABA stint lasted from the time he was 4 years old till he was 17 years old. But with RDI, he started to reconnect with us. You know, his behavior issues went down drastically. We started building this beautiful relationship, and I started discovering who he really was.
And I think that's just a beautiful foundation for what you and I are going to visit about. And first, I just can't believe it. Moet is 34 years old.
32.
32. I'll keep him as young as he is. My son's 28, and you know I'm a parent too. But one of the things I think is helpful laying that foundation is that as parents and consultants, this topic for us is very personal. Understanding autism, understanding RDI, and how it's for everyone. It's not, and I love that you are open and that you share that you started at 17 years old with him, that he was 17. It really goes to one of my first points that I wanted to talk to you about, is that RDI is not just for young children or older or older. It's for everyone. It can make a difference in everyone's life, can't it?
Absolutely. I worked with students in their 20s, Kat, and I saw changes in them. There was one that I started, the oldest that I started was when he was 31. And we saw changes even there, big changes, in terms of him. Like, I feel they just become comfortable in their own skins, and they start blossoming and they start connecting to people around them.
Another thing I wanted to be sure we touched on as we go forward is a question I get so much, and a question and a comment, honestly, that RDI is just for some children or some adults, that they need to have this much language or this level of skills in this area. And I would call it a myth, but it's just really an untruth. And I wanted you to speak to that, because I know you've worked with children with all kinds of complications going on. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. I feel RDI is applicable to everyone, irrespective of the level of language. In fact, I struggle more with the children who have more language, because they use that language as it kind of becomes a barrier sometimes, I feel, to understanding what the real cause is. But with when they have less language, I can see through clearly, like, what's actually going on based on their eye gaze and their movements. So of course, I mean, we've had huge success with kids who've gone on to university, and who live independently and all of that. Obviously, they had a lot of language in place, and RDI like revolutionized their lives. But I won't say that the ones who have less language are less impacted. They continue to progress and move ahead and really achieve a lot in life.
I think that points to understanding the vulnerabilities that can be obstacles to in autism that people have, whether they've got a high level of skills or they're still working on those skills. Those I refer to them as vulnerabilities that everyone has in common. And I want you to speak a little bit to that, because I think that's very misunderstood in terms of how people think about autism.
Right. So, I mean, it's, how I look at it, Kat, is like the core deficits and the co-occurring conditions. And we find these in various permutations and combinations. So, the core deficits across the board, they're common to everyone. The co-occurring conditions, you could have speech and language issues, behavior issues, medical problems, so many learning difficulties. So each person is different, each individual is different, their vulnerabilities come across differently. And I feel, we need to dig deeper and really support them with that. And once we're able to kind of, take out from our minds that, oh, this cannot be remedied,
Mhm.
then the sky is the limit. I have recently, a mother's been in touch with her an adult son who, she says, has so many physical issues, and she sent me a video where this young man was struggling, with motor movements and to hold a toothbrush. And it was difficult to watch. But I remembered, one incident when Dr. Gutstein had come to India. And one of my clients, she went up to him and she said, Dr. Gutstein, I get stuck because there aren't many frameworks that my son can engage in because of his physical motor issues and his skill levels. And I remember Dr. Gutstein stopping there, and he very thoughtfully just turned around and he said, but I don't understand what that's got to do with thinking. And I'll never forget that, Cat.
Mm.
Because when I see a child who presents these other difficulties or these vulnerabilities, as you say, but that doesn't mean that person can't think.
Mm.
We can't forget that there's an incredible mind in there, and it's up to us to kind of dig deeper and to kind of understand how to connect with this beautiful person.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important that we understand the difference between vulnerabilities that can be obstacles in autism itself and that co-occurring vulnerabilities, like you said, there can be speech issues, there can be, I know my son had severe asthma, life-threatening,
Yeah,
uh, terrible sleep disorder, but those things weren't autism. Those things were
absolutely.
other very challenging things in his life, I have to
Right.
tell you, but those were co-occurring vulnerabilities, not autism. They were obstacles to learning for sure, just because of the drain on the physical body. But
Right.
I think people struggle with understanding this difference, don't you?
Right. Absolutely. I think everything gets dumped under the umbrella of autism. So I totally get it because Mo has seizures. And so, but that's not autism. That's something that needs medical treatment. It needs attention. Um, but when I look at someone, I've just learned to look for the core areas that Dr. G talks about in terms of, co-regulation, understanding their roles and situations, their ability to self-regulate, to add value, emotional responsibility, to learn by co-experiencing from others, the sense of self. So I mean, if we look at that and we say, no, this is my area that I'm going to work on, and of course I'm going to address these obstacles as well. But I think it's very important to bring that point across, and I struggle as well, Kat, to explain it to others because if the child is hyperactive because he has autism,
Mm.
or the speech, he's not speaking because he has autism, so everything gets clubbed under autism when that's not necessarily true.
Mm. No, and I think without that understanding, everything kind of gets confusing, and we can't seek out the solutions for helping even those co-occurring vulnerabilities because we're really not looking in the right place.
Right, right.
Yeah. I actually received this in my email today, and I was sharing it with you, Comedy, as well as everybody else. But it was a
Right.
piece from Dr. Shealy, and it just talked about one of those co-occurring being anxiety, and I thought it was really
Absolutely.
cool because an anxiety issue can be an issue, as we well know, all of us, for any person. We certainly know we've seen a lot this last year and a half, and and we know that there are side effects from having anxiety, but many times anxiety is, I'm afraid, I hate to say, and as an example for us in our chat, about a co-occurring condition that's just linked to autism and not actually addressed itself. And
So
that
true.
is very hard, because if any person I know, I'm sure you have as well, that you knew had either a social anxiety issue or a different type of anxiety, it's very limiting in their life. And so without actually treating that itself, you can have all kinds of issues and not be able to live a best life, don't you think?
Absolutely. I've struggled with this with a lot of my older students, Kat, and we've had to kind of look at it and, address it and go deep into it. And also with the lockdown, with children being at home for so many months at a stretch. Like in India, the situation is still pretty bad. And it's been like 18 months now. So almost 15 to 18 months. And with the lack of physical activity and, being home all the time, not having an enriched environment in that sense has really exaggerated and aggravated the anxiety issues as well.
Well, and we know with anxiety that human beings, being human beings, they will self-stim more. So self-stim is so often self-stimulatory behavior is associated with autism, but it's something um, human beings do when they're anxious. I was at the airport. I say not happily because it wasn't the greatest experience recently. And it was there at 4 a.m, and it was just jammed with people, which was unexpected. And so in a long waiting line for security, I was observing people, and so many people were so anxious for obvious reasons coming in the airport.
Right.
Travel
Right.
were engaged in many, of course, I wasn't judging it all. Almost everyone was anxious in that line, but many self-stimulatory behaviors, shaking their legs, shaking. One woman was singing rather loudly to calm herself. And yet, I think this is something that's so misunderstood, that it's not an autism. It could be an anxiety issue that's causing your child to exhibit that as a symptom of anxiety. So
Right.
such important concepts for us to understand. Um, so I want to talk about why we love RDI in our final minutes, and why we think it is just helpful, not just to children, but to their parents too. I was thinking about this, and I was like, I know as a parent, it changed our lives. It definitely has led my son to continuing to move toward living his best life. But it changed me. It changed our family. What do you have to say about that?
I think this is so spot on. I think it's first for parents, because I feel that almost everyone, by the time they get to RDI, are in a crisis mode, and they may not realize it. Like I didn't think I was in crisis mode myself. When I found it, I was like, okay, I'm this I have it under control. I'm a BCABA. I'm offering the best that I can for my son, and all this with that kind of baggage. And then when I came to RDI, I realized that I was literally carrying around so much anxiety. And in the early days, way in the beginning, when we started and when we would just work on simple frameworks, a simple ball play or something that Mo and I would do together. And I realized that as I slowed down for him, my anxiety started dissipating. So as much as it helped him, it helped me much more. And I would actually feel that the time that I spent with him were meditative for me. So they really helped in a big way. And of course, when the entire family starts looking at the child differently, because here he was with, like, taking in stuff and actually communicating with us much more and understanding situations around him without everything being explained. and then going on to become an artist. Like that whole journey, like all of us are so proud of him. You know, his dad, his sister, everyone is impacted positively with RDI. And it's like my only wish is that it should have come earlier into my life. But it is what it is. And I feel it with all the moms that I work with. I can see the anxiety. I can feel the anxiety that they're in. You know, there are many depressive episodes happening as well, and people struggling in so many ways. I feel RDI is essential. It's essential for everyone.